I've just finished watching The Gloves Are Off, Scott Quigg versus Carl Frampton. And let me say in the strongest possible terms, this is superb viewing. 10 out of 10, highly recommended. Real thanks and shout out to everyone who made me aware it was currently available to watch. And I strongly recommend you guys check it out. I think one of the things that has slightly decreased my interest in the Gloves Are Off series in more recent fights is the fighters are so well known. The build-up between them has been so publicised. If we talk like Anthony Joshua, Dillian White, for example, or Spike O'Sullivan versus Chris Eubank, for example, that by the time you get to the Gloves Are Off, it's kind of rehearsed. It's happened again and again and again. You know every line, you know every story. This one was something completely different. And part of me thinks that's because the two guys have very much had representatives in the media for them. You know, for Scott Quigg, he's got huge personalities behind him. Eddie Hearn and also Joe Gallagher, who do a lot of the speaking for him. For Carl Frampton, it's the same with the McGuigans in his corner. And, you know, more often than not, if at a press conference, you may notice that the two fighters themselves are actually quieter. So we perhaps haven't seen them as close up as this footage. And that's why, for me, this was such good viewing, because it was something a bit different, something new, and it was a bit stripped bare with the two guys there on their own, without, you know, Eddie Hearn, Joe Gallagher, or the McGuigans to speak for them. And yeah, this was compelling viewing, let me say. Going into this, I thought Carl Frampton would be likely to come out of this as the winner, if you like. Frampton is viewed as the superstar. He's viewed as the sort of star performer inside and outside the ring. Quigg, to me, he's always been a sort of slightly quieter, more reserved guy. But let me say, again, in the strongest possible terms, Scott Quigg schooled Carl Frampton in this. It was one of the most dominant performances you will see in The Gloves Are Off. Scott Quigg had Carl Frampton up against the ropes and was battering him with verbal shots for the equivalent of 12 rounds. Now look, all the talk outside of the ring is WWE, it's entertainment, it's building the hype, it's creating the excitement around the fight. It's certainly getting me excited. I'm buzzing for it having seen this. The fact that Scott Quigg schooled Carl Frampton in this does not necessarily mean Scott Quigg schooled Carl Frampton in a fight. But trust me, if you want to get pumped for the fight, it's worth watching this. I'm going to run through, and I've made some notes on the back of an envelope because we are a professional outfit here. But I'm going to talk through some of the things that I wanted to mention to you guys, if you haven't heard it. So at the start, the guys are talking about, you know, who wanted the fight more, who's been chasing the fight. And Carl Frampton said, like, why didn't you take the fight when I was with Eddie Hearn and we offered it to you? And Scott Quigg goes, well, it was 75k. And Carl Frampton said, yeah, why didn't you take it? That was a career high payday. And Scott Quigg kind of goes, well, isn't it obvious? Look where we are now. Look how big the fight is now. And Carl Frampton sort of goes, oh, okay then. You know. And then Scott Quigg turns it back on Carl Frampton. And he goes, actually, out of interest, you know, Eddie Hearn put in an offer when he was managing you. But since you left Eddie Hearn, why have you guys never made an offer to fight me? Why has it always been me making the offers? Why have you guys never put in an offer to fight me? And Carl Frampton quite literally says, I don't know. I don't know. You know, then Scott Quigg starts to turn the screw a bit, and he starts saying to Carl Frampton, why have you turned down 60-40 for the winner? You know, you're so confident of winning the fight, you want it so much. Why did you turn down 60-40 for the winner? You know, Carl, to be honest, really tried to avoid the question. He tried to avoid the question 3 or 4 times. And he eventually started talking about the freak incident that happened in the Flanagan-Zepeda fight, and how, you know, a freak accident could happen to him, and how he doesn't want to, you know, it looks weak. It looks weak. It looks unconvincing. And Scott Quigg is sitting there. He's calm, cool, collected. He's smiling. He's grinning. He's content. He's happy with himself. He's looking at Carl Frampton's discomfort. And then Carl Frampton tries to fire back. And Scott Quigg makes the clear point that Carl doesn't really know what's going on in negotiations. He says, is that what your team's told you? You know, he's almost laughing at Carl Frampton. He goes, is that what they've actually told you, Carl? You know, and this is the difference, that there's this idea that Eddie Hearn has Scott Quigg's lawyer, involved actively in negotiations, where Carl Frampton has people doing that for him. And for me, it's a dominant start from Scott Quigg. You know, Carl Frampton thinks he makes a good point with why did Scott Quigg turn down the 75k offer, but Quigg answers it really, really well and makes some great points that Team Frampton haven't offered Quigg. You know, that Team Frampton rejected the 60-40 fight to the winner. And perhaps that Carl Frampton doesn't actually know what's going on in negotiations. Quigg, who's now on the front foot, says, you know, how he's not. Johnny Nelson says, like, is Carl getting to you? And he goes, look, I'm not bothered. It's Carl who gets aggressive. It's Carl who's sitting there squirming. You know, he calls me arrogant. But at the last press conference, he was sitting there with a piece of paper saying the real champion. Now who's the arrogant one? And Carl Frampton had to be, I was just playing the game. You know, Carl Frampton at this point is properly on his back foot. He's properly on the defensive. And Quigg is just sitting there, like, so confident, like, sort of oozing confidence at this point. And it really surprised me, because Quigg I'd viewed as the sort of quiet, awkward guy, less of a star. And he's got Carl Frampton in all sorts of bother here. You know, Scott Quigg then sort of really takes it to the next level. He starts talking about the time in sparring where Carl Frampton gets heavily KO'd. You know, so he was knocked out in sparring. And Carl Frampton eventually has to admit that there was a time in a gym in Scotland where he was dropped by someone Quigg seemingly knows. Carl Frampton then took it a step further and said he was dropped by a heavy body shot in a gym in Manchester. So Quigg has got Carl Frampton to admit he's been dropped twice in sparring. You know, and Quigg's just smiling, loving it. Carl Frampton's like super on the defensive. You know, Johnny Nelson is then asking questions about who the more popular fighter is. The more popular fighter out of the two is very clearly Carl Frampton. You know, there's no debate as to that, really. And Scott Quigg just absolutely stonewalls it. It's like, no, he's not more popular than me. Not at all. You know, just, you know, he's just winding Carl Frampton up so much. And, you know, Quigg saying things like, I set a trap for Kiko Martinez, he walked straight into it. Look how upset Carl's getting, he's obviously going to walk into it again and again. You know, I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it in front of me. But, you know, he's saying Carl's going to try and box and run, but he's going to fall into the trap. And you can see Carl Frampton, you know, really sort of squirming in his seat. And every time Carl Frampton tried to raise a good point, Scott Quigg just had an answer. You know, Carl Frampton said Quigg should be embarrassed how he's won his belt. You know, he's won his belt by emails. And then he gets asked, I think Johnny Nelson asked him actually, if you win the belt, will you not wear Quigg's belt then? Would you not put Quigg's belt on because it's not a real championship? And Carl has to admit that he wants the belt and he'd be happy to wear it after the fight. You know, and then sort of Carl asks Quigg if he's happy with the way he's won his belt, and Quigg goes, of course, the best guy you've ever fought. I demolished him inside 2 rounds. And it just seems that every time Carl came up with a point that he thought was a good point, a knockout blow, Quigg just had the answer like that. You know, he was saying the Kiko Martinez thing, you know, it was great. Quigg was on fire. To me, Quigg had very clearly been prepped for this by Joe Gallagher and Eddie Hearn. I reckon they had sat with him for hours, giving him intensive training. You know, Carl's going to say this, let's say this. You know, Carl's going to try and make this point, let's have it ready. Because Quigg was like instinctive, he was so on the ball, he knew exactly what to say. And yeah, I thought he absolutely schooled Carl Frampton in this, you know. And I'm a Frampton fan, but you know, Quigg came across here as the far quicker individual, and he made some very good points, and he answered all of Carl Frampton's questions very well. And at that time, Carl Frampton looked uncomfortable, looked out of ideas, you know, and he was reduced to saying things like, okay then. You know, at the end, the guys shake hands. Johnny Nelson says, give me a prediction. And Carl Frampton's like, well, I believe I've got the boxing skill to outpoint Scott Quigg. I also think I carry enough power to KO him, you know. And then they go, and Scott, how are you going to win the fight? Knockout. You know, just so confident, so direct. He made Carl Frampton look long-winded. He made Carl Frampton look all over the place, less decisive. You know, Quigg was composed, calm and collected. He was so strong in this, let me tell you. And I think this build-up is playing into Quigg's hands slightly. You know, we talk about this, I've talked about this before. I've talked about this with my good friend and fellow YouTuber Ultratech Sport, and his viewpoint, I think, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think his viewpoint was all of the pre-fight amble and banter goes out the window when the fight actually starts and it's all irrelevant. But let's put it this way, this is the biggest fight of both guys' lives. It's the biggest platform of both guys' lives. There's obviously dislike there. The fans are going to be baying for blood. Carl Frampton is the superior boxer on the back foot, I believe. So what Quigg is trying to do is goad him, you know, anger him. Carl Frampton's known as this, and his team especially, this sort of fiery, you know, aggressive, macho type characters. And Quigg wants to reduce this to a centre of the ring fight, you know, where two guys go at it. And potentially that plays more into Quigg's hands. And, you know, whilst sometimes I agree that it comes down to boxing pedigree, and it may do on this occasion, if hatred and emotion has the potential to affect the way a fight plays out, then it can be relevant. I mean, look at Joshua Dillian White. You know, I think a lot of the pre-fight hate there possibly made Joshua give up his boxing and get involved into more of a scrap than he needed to. And if that happens in this fight, it becomes far more viable. Scott Quigg wins. You know, Scott Quigg came across as super calm, super ready for this fight. You know, very confident and very prepared. You know, very, very prepared. He didn't seem nervous. You know, I know this is the biggest stage of his career, certainly, but he looked ready for it. He looked ready for it. Carl Frampton, he was being frustrated. He was out-talked. He was out-fought in this one. It doesn't necessarily transpire, but very, very, very good viewing this. It helps get you excited for the fight, and it gives a more direct view to the two personalities involved who maybe have other spokesmen outside of the ring. Let me know your thoughts. How did you see it? Was it as dominant and a one-sided performance from Quigg as I see it? You know, have I got this one right or wrong? Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this review, hit the thumbs up button. I'm going to be covering all the build-up to the fight, so if you're looking forward to it like I am, hit the subscribe button. Wouldn't want you guys to miss out. Thanks a lot for watching.